Hello, loves, and welcome back to the Mindful Empress. First, I want to apologize for taking so long to get this video done. I have really struggled with organizing my feelings and the pain of processing the trauma of abandonment. And you can hear my cat down there. So just processing the pain of the trauma of abandonment it's been a challenge, I think, because I realize that a lot of other traumas that I identified previously were in direct relationship to how I viewed myself because of my abandonment issues. So I've really struggled these last couple of weeks to put this video together and just talk about it, because every time I think about it and I put my thoughts down on paper, I get really emotional. And I didn't want to record a video where I was just bawling my eyes out the whole time. So, but it's healing to do this, because I realize that by sharing all parts of my brokenness, kind of create a full picture of my healing and the blessings in my life and the grace. And I want to share that with you in all aspects. It's just not the pretty stuff. So, I guess my initial issue with the trauma of abandonment started with my biological father. My parents were divorced when I was 3 years old, and he was not a very active part of my life. I can remember as a kid, being told, oh, your dad's going to come get you this weekend. And, you're sitting on the porch and you're waiting and you're waiting and you got a bag packed and you're excited. And he would be a no-show. There were times that my uncle, who was married to my dad's sister, would show up and come pick me up to go spend the night at their house, because they had a daughter that was close to my age, and, kind of take my mind off the fact that my dad never showed up, but the pain was still there. I think about in high school, him not showing up for my high school graduation, and just really wanting to have that relationship with my father was damaging. I had a father that raised me somewhat. A man came into my mother's life when I was about 8 years old, and he did a lot of things that a dad would do, but he was never a permanent fixture in the house. We did vacations. He was there for birthdays. He was there for big events, and, he did report card presents, and, through high school, even though they weren't married and they weren't together, he was still somewhat active in my life, but it wasn't that father-daughter relationship that I see my daughters have with my husband. It was never like that. And I know those feelings of just not feeling good enough to have a man stay in my life leaped into my future relationships with men. And I didn't love myself, so it was really hard to find relationships where I felt loved. So with my children's fathers, I have my 2 older sons, both have different fathers. And in those relationships, I think I wanted love and I thought there was love. But when I look back at it, it wasn't love. They were situationships. And I'm thankful for my boys. Those were the blessings that came out of those relationships. I have two wonderful sons. My oldest son is going to be 23 this summer, and then my younger son is 17. And they've been the greatest gift. Just unconditional love and all those things. Which, if you're a mother, you know. Sorry, my hands are shaking. Just talking about my boys, they make me so proud. But along with having them growing up in the family that I did with the Christian household, and, you know, sex before marriage is wrong, and here I go with not one but two products of sex before marriage. There was a lot of shame that came along with the birth of my boys. So I carry that with me. So in part, the trauma of abandonment led me to loveless relationships. The relationship with my older son's father was short-lived. And I knew early on that once I found out I was pregnant, I didn't want to focus on a relationship. I wanted to focus on being a mom and figuring that out. I was 18 years old, so I think I made a good decision there to focus on taking care of me and my child. Nothing else mattered at that point. With my younger son's father, the relationship was toxic. It was a very, very unhealthy relationship. And I stayed in that relationship for almost 6 years, pushing the love, not wanting to fail, not wanting my kids to grow up without a dad, even though it wasn't good for me. And I think I realized that it was time to get out when I got to the point where I was very suicidal. And when my younger son was he wasn't quite a year old yet, he was still breastfeeding. I got really, really drunk, and I took a handful of sleeping pills and wrote a note to my boys and decided I didn't want to wake up in the morning. And by the grace of God, I woke up the next morning extremely sick, but I woke up. And at that point, I realized that if I left this world, my boys would have no one. My mother was dying of cancer at that point, so that was another thing that was extremely overwhelming. And I just realized that, no matter what happens, I have to be here for them. And months after that, I separated from his father and moved on. And a few months after that relationship was severed, my mother passed away. And we knew that she wasn't going to make it. She had battled cancer for a few years, and at that point, my biological father came when she was in a coma, and he stayed with me. And that was the first time that I can say I spent good quality time with him, and it was a lot of healing and rebuilding. But I was still hurt, and I was angered, and I was drinking a lot, and I was smoking a lot of pot, trying to cope with the emotions of losing my mother. And me and my dad got to a place where we, there would be nights. He stayed with me for a couple of months until I buried her. And we, there were times where I would bring up, do you remember the time you said you were going to come get me and you never showed up? Or why weren't you at my high school graduation? And we got to talk about those things, and I got to hear his side and understand where he was coming from, and realize that, he wasn't off making babies. He was going through his own struggles. And I don't say that to minimize the pain that I felt, but I had a better understanding of where he was coming from. After my mother died, the father that helped raise me also disappeared out of my life. And that was another blow that until a couple weeks ago, I didn't realize how much it hurt me. I was 24 years old when my mother passed away. And a few years after she died, I met my husband, and we had our 2 daughters, and we were in the process of leaving California and going to Alaska. We moved there, and I hunted for him because I hadn't heard from him since a couple months after my mother passed away. And I found his home number, and I called to talk to him. And because of the situation, he took my number and he said he would call me back, but he asked me not to call his house again. And he was the one person that was a constant outside of my mother. So that hurt. It was painful. But I let it go because I said, well, I'm rebuilding my relationship with my biological father, and I'll focus on that. And but it didn't change the fact that it affected me. And I didn't realize how much it affected me until I sat in my therapist hour and cried for 2 hours straight. So I recently read a book called Fatherless Daughters, and I highly suggest it if you have abandonment issues. It touches on all types of situations, from fathers being in prison, from fathers being addicts, from fathers passing away, to, being separated from your father because of divorce. There's all different scenarios, and it really gives you some insight on how people deal with those things. So I highly recommend it. My relationship with my dad now it's much better. I mean, I've always known my father, and I've always been very, very close to his side of the family, but growing up, I just didn't have him. I always had my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, because my mother was amazing in that way, that she kept that relationship open for me and my brother, but he wasn't there, and that's what I needed. And now we talk on a regular basis, and there's still healing to be done, but I love my father. It's nothing but love, and I'm looking forward to continuing to heal and build in my relationship with him. So that's just a little bit about that part of my life, and I know I'm not the only one that suffers with those kind of issues, and kind of wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Yeah. So please comment, like, subscribe, share even, and wear your crown, rule your empire. Until next time, love and blessings.